Why this, cuz?
Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this.
What's up, my people? Thank you for joining your boy once again for another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions right up here on the YouTubes. You know how we do it, and if you couldn't tell, you know who we're celebrating today. So the streets have been talking, and they've been saying your boy has not been doing enough album rankings for R&B artists. So I guess it's been a minute since I've done one, so let's show love to an artist who's getting a whole lot of attention these days, and not just for the memes. Let's shout out the talent. Let's shout out Mr. Usher Raymond. So today, if you can't tell, we doing it my way. That's how we gonna do it today. But y'all know how it is. Before we get started, let's run through it. D Roth, you know how we do it. Hit like if you haven't already. Hit share if you haven't already. You better subscribe if you're watching this video. It don't cost nothing. Just hit the button. Show us some love, because that way the more likes, shares, and subscribes we get, the more motivation your boy has to do more of these videos that you love, or that you love to hate on. Regardless, either way, we hooking you up. So, and also make sure you comment as well. More comments, more engagement, more traction, more love for all of us. So anyway, let's get started on Usher. Always, as we do with these rankings, we're talking about all of his discography going from front to back, and we're rating it not just my preference. I think you can tell what my preference is, but we're talking about quality, consistency, and of course, legacy. Usher's got a lot of that. Let's get going. Have mercy. Coming in at number 9 is the most recent Usher project, A. Just the letter A. Just the letter A. It does not get a grade of A. It gets a grade of D-. Let's talk about what went wrong with this collabo project with Zaytoven. So most fans who are longtime Usher fans know that the late 2010s wasn't the best time for our boy, even though he's on somewhat of a resurgence now. Creatively, he was in a bit of a rut. And A was a chance for him to have a collabo project with Zaytoven, who is a mastermind behind a bunch of trap songs that I don't really like, and be able to put himself forward there. The result is just a sloppy mess. There's just random songs with no cohesion. They didn't take off, and even at the time when I reviewed it on my site, Soul and Stereo, people were like, "Oh, you old man, you just won't get it. These songs are gonna be popping in the club." Well, it's been like 4 years, player. What clubs have been popping? I ain't seen none. These songs did not take off because they just were very disposable. It was not to the level of an artist for Usher's quality. They were just Jeremiah, sure, these are great, but we expect more. I will say I loved You Decide. That's a great song, but otherwise, a total misfire. Coming in at number 8 is Hard to Love, and if there was ever an album with an accurate title, it would be this one. This album is very hard to love. And we thought that this was the bottom of the barrel. We didn't even get to A then, so things were rough. And let me lay the groundwork for those who may not understand. The late 2010s, actually the whole 2010s, was a very difficult time for our R&B legends. You had a new sound that was just everywhere all at once. Shout out to the movie. That's awesome. And that was just permeating things so strongly that our legends were trying to keep up. There's this new generation that's doing all this stuff. They're like, I can do this. Let me keep up. So they were stepping out of their lanes into this new sound, and it was like putting on your granddaddy's church shoes. They're way too big. They're too scuffy. They're too tight. They don't fit. and this did not fit. To his credit, Hard to Love did have a couple joints. I mean, they had Missing You, Tell Me. He had a couple joints here. But kind of like A, like most of the songs just were not a strong fit, and it felt out of character for Usher. It just seemed like he was cosplaying what everybody else was doing instead of creating a cohesive new sound for himself. Another misfire. It's a better album overall due to its construction and writing than A, but the same mistakes permeate. It's just not the album that we needed. Usher was no longer innovating, he was imitating. And hopefully those days are behind us, because things get much higher from here, and hopefully we don't revisit the past. Please don't, Usher. Give us something new. Coming in at number 7 is Raymond versus Raymond, the Usher album everybody forgets about, and that's probably why it's at number 7. This one didn't have a great reputation at the time, and again, I get it. Like I was saying about the last 2 albums, when you think of Usher, there's a high bar that you have to put up there. This one didn't quite meet it, but it's not a bad album overall because he's got the heavy hitters. Brian Michael Cox is here, JD is here, Jermaine Dupri, Polo the Don. It's a lot of good stuff, and the singles particularly are very strong. Album covers are a little bit weaker, and I think that's why it hurts it a little bit, but there's just not enough here that makes this at all memorable. So the reason why everybody forgets it is this. Plus the whole concept is kind of weird. The Raymond versus Raymond, like when you pick 2 of the same characters in Mortal Kombat and one has a different color than the other. I don't know. Another one that could have been a lot better than it was with some fine tuning, but it just gets lost in the album shuffle. Coming in at number 6, Usher's Here I Stand. Man, I could go all day on this album. I could do a whole video on this album because this is where good intentions go awry. Remember when Usher was adult contemporary and y'all were pissed off? That's probably why he just went all the way the other way and started doing trap stuff, because y'all didn't like grown man Usher. So let's put it into perspective. At this point in Usher's career, I believe he was married at this point. He was an adult. He was trying to do something different, and he wanted the music to reflect that portion of his life. Problem is, his fan base still wanted some of that youngin' music, and they weren't really resonating with the more mature sounds here. The problem with that is at the time it was reflected as a bad album, and the album wasn't bad. The problem was the audience just didn't get the album, and that's what makes it different. However, you know me, and your boy's gonna nitpick, and even though this album is a lot stronger than it gets credit for, trust me, if this album came out today, y'all would be losing your minds because the audience is old enough and mature enough to get the themes. So I get that. However, the album is not perfect, even though there's a lot of retconning going on here. There's still some weaknesses, there's some good singles, there's some really good album cuts. But the stuff in between, it's almost like one of those albums where it's good song, bad song, good song, bad song. There's some stuff that could have been left on the cutting room floor to make this even stronger. So it is an underrated Usher album, but it's not as great as some people try to claim it to be. There's been some revisionist history around it, like this was an incredible album that everybody missed out on. You probably missed out on it. If you didn't like it back then, I guarantee you if you checked it out today, you probably would like it a little bit better. But it's certainly not a top 3 album by any means. Coming in at number 5, and I know the one I will get the most hate on, is Looking for Myself. This album is another one that got a beating from R&B fans back in the day. And I understand why. This is the era where Usher again, looking for himself. See what I did there? See what I did there? He was trying to refine his sound in this new era. And even though everybody loved Climax and we thought that was going to be the single that was going to propel this album into this new sound, that was kind of almost a one-off. Because the album was drifting between pop sounds and he was still playing EDM. He had some darker stuff. He had hip-hop. It was a little all over the place. But I respect the hustle. a lot of the songs that you don't think would work actually work, which is the opposite of Hard to Love and A era, where he was doing what everybody expected and you would think that it could work and it just didn't. It just sounded like a clone. He was able to put Usher into some of these new creative spaces. But again, it's not the Usher that most people are used to hearing, so it kind of threw him off. Kind of think of it with the new Beyonce album, Renaissance. There is a fan base of Beyonce fans who love anything Beyonce. So no, she can sing the phone book. It's going to be 5 stars or you die. Trust me, that's how my inbox looks. But then there's a subset of fans that likes R&B Beyonce. And if you only like R&B Beyonce, when she starts doing disco and some other stuff, you can be like, I don't really like this. I want this. That's kind of how this album was. There was a fan base that likes Usher, but the sounds and everything were just so different. I think it was hard for some people to wrap their heads around. So it was a little pushback at the time. I will say, if you're watching this video and you hated that album, give it another spin, players. Trust me, it's a little bit better than you think. It might not go down as easily as Here I Stand, but I think overall, from the experimental risks he took and the cohesion overall, I think it's a slightly better album, and definitely better than his rep gives it. Coming in at number 4 is Usher's debut, just called Usher. I always have to shake my head, and even back in '97, y'all, this was happening, where people thought that Usher's sophomore breakout album was his first album. Those of us who were around in '94 know Usher been around. We remember little boy Usher dancing on the roof and calling him a Mac and All I Do Is Think of You. We knew this Usher. This was the Usher that we came up on. But that time in '94, the competition was tough. You had TLC, you had Mary J. Blige, you had Boyz II Men. There were just so many crowded voices in R&B. It's a little easy for him to get kind of pushed behind and overlooked. But even though he would break out to bigger and better things in the years to come, his debut album, is actually pretty solid. And I think it's one of those ones that needs a little bit more attention than it gets. It's an album that definitely shows, I'm sure for him, it's like looking at old baby pictures. It's like, I don't want to see that. I look weird and old. There are definitely some growing pains that you can see through the album. But the thing I like, there's just so much potential here. And when we've got underrated writers like Faith Evans doing some pens behind the scenes, it's well written and well sung for an artist of his caliber just coming out. So it's not a perfect album, but it shows so much potential that we knew that a star was rising. Especially when we get to the next album. Coming in at number 3 is My Way. And D Roth, stop playing with the people, player. Stop playing with the people. Go on in and put the real album cover up. Just show the real album cover for my peoples, because you thought that was the real cover. I look so much like him. You thought it was the real cover. I fooled you. But nope, that's the real cover, and this album is one that was a turning point for Usher. We always talk about the sophomore jinx and the sophomore curse, and can you get past it? Well, I think the expectations of his debut, I wouldn't say were low, but he had room to grow, and boy, he matured exponentially when it came to the sophomore album. This album took Usher from little kid in high school being goofy to a straight up high school sex symbol. Let me tell you, because the girls were all about some shirtless Usher in 1997. We saw a lot of growth on this album, and even though it's just maybe 10 tracks, and one of those is just like a random remix, even though it's a short, tight track list, that tightness works for its advantage. Not enough room here to get bloated or ridiculous or to lose its way or to lose its trajectory. It's short to the sweet, to the point, and has given us some of his most classic songs. You Make Me Wanna, My Way, Nice and Slow, all right here on this album, plus some really good slow cuts as well. Pen it for your thoughts. Oh, banger, and y'all don't know nothing about it. Check out this album if you haven't already. It's one of the ones that's really the blueprint of Usher today. When he started his ascent, this was the launching point. Coming in at number 2 is 8701. I know some fans that consider this his best album, and it's kind of hard to argue it. We'll get to number 1 in a second, which I know will surprise no one. But you can make a very strong case that this album is just as good. To me, I gave them the same score. They're of equal quality. Sometimes, though, that they're just, the stars just aligned for magic, because you had Usher, who was coming of age, ready to break out as the new top R&B star of the millennium. You had Jermaine Dupri, the Neptunes, Brian Michael Cox, all these veterans who were about to hit their peak creatively as well. So everyone just peaked at the same time. And the result was this album, an album that really went on to define the next 10 years of R&B. And the only reason it doesn't get as much credit as it should is because of the album that comes next on the list. Still, you would be very hard pressed to find a flaw in this one. Very well done. His vocals have really matured at this point, so every song pops. I would say it's one of the most underrated albums of the 2000s, which is weird because it's one of the best, but it's just so often overshadowed by the next album on the list. And you'll see why. And absolutely surprising nobody, coming in at number 1 is Confessions. And I'm sure that 95% of you that click on this video knew what number 1 was going to be, and there's a good reason for that. Of all the R&B albums of this era, and especially in the past 10 years where we've been kind of at this drought of classic genre-defining albums, and the reason for that isn't because the quality isn't there. I have many albums in the past 10 years that have given this score or better. The problem is, it doesn't have the legacy behind it. This album is one of the last R&B albums to have a long-lasting legacy. Usher was able to do that because he had an album that not only resonated with R&B fans, but permeated pop culture too. Between the Confessions thing and the so-and-so cheating and coming clean about Chili and blah, and some of that has been kind of debunked over the years, but the whole narrative that this is his coming out party for all of his indiscretions. He's got his pop hits. He's got, oh my gosh, yeah, I still don't like Yeah, y'all. I do not like Yeah. But I can't deny what an incredible impact that song was, and the perfect song for that era of crunk music. He pushed that thing forward. Classic songs left and right, classic performances left and right, best vocal performances left and right, Superstar and so many others. The dude sounds immaculate vocally, and this album has gone on to be the Usher album, and not just the Usher album, the R&B album for the 2010s, or for the 2000s going into the 2010s. Now I know you're gonna ask, why does this, if it's so great, only get 4.5 stars? And I'm going to tell you. And yes, I know you're going to say, oh, because you just find problems with everything. Well, yes, I do. But along with that, my one nitpick, and it's kind of a bit nitpick, is the album is just a little too long. From front to back, absolutely filled with classic and great songs. But there's some filler that I could have chopped off. And we're not even getting to the deluxe edition, because that's even more filler on that. Even though that one gives us the Confessions Part 1, which is one of my favorite Usher songs ever. Maybe my favorite Usher song ever. Regardless, the overall project is a little lengthy, but that doesn't take away from its legacy. Because if you know me, I've said it a million times before, star ratings do not necessarily equate to classic status. I can give an album a 4-star review, and it can still be a classic because it's had such an impact or legacy on the artist's career or the industry overall. Star rating is just quality, and quality doesn't necessarily have to equal legacy. This album ain't perfect, but when it comes to legacy for both Usher and R&B, it's an absolute classic, and you could argue it is the last official R&B classic. And if that's the last R&B classic, we haven't had a classic album since 2004, it's a player kind of sad. But that's an argument for another day. Regardless, Confessions, by far, no argument here, the best album of Usher Raymond's career. Let's see if he can top. so that's it. We went through all of Usher's discography. Now it's your turn. Tell your boy what you thought in the comments below. Are you an 8701 fan or are you a Confessions fan? Did you like Looking For Myself or do you think it's the worst album ever? Are you one of the two weirdos who tried to convince me that A was good? Let me know so I can block you. But again, let me know what you think below and we can get it done. Alright players, you know how it goes. Let's wrap this thing up. This edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions is a wrap. Play on, players.